Beyond the Hood, stories and strategies to fuel dealer growth.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Beyond the Hood with Tractor Zoom. I'm your host, Andy Campbell, and our guest today is George Keane of Wise Wolf Consulting. If you're a sales manager, sales leader within your equipment dealership, this podcast is for you. And this is part of a larger conversation that we had with George, but we've truncated this down to be about 35 minutes of the most focused topics on sales management and sales leadership. Specifically, I'm going to talk to George a lot about sales manager strategy, account assignment, how do sales managers assign accounts, from balancing customer retention versus prospecting, and all the strategic decisions that go into account coverage. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with George as much as I did having it. Welcome everyone to another episode of Beyond the Hood with Tractor Zoom. I'm your host, Andy Campbell, and I have the distinct pleasure of being joined today by George Keane with Wise Wolf Consulting. George, thanks for joining me.
Nice to be here.
Good. Well, and George, I first learned about you with an article that you had published on farmequipment.com. And then I found out about your book. And from a totally different source, somebody emailed me and said, hey, have you ever heard or talked to George? And they included a link to some of your stuff. And then we had set up this podcast, and then you sent me your bio. And so I'm going to read just bullet point off in this bio to set the stage for today's talk. So if anybody does not know George, so 10 years with the software DMS, so a dealer management system for those that might not know. So customer support, North American sales, 15 years with Curry Management Consultants. So that's consulting in construction, ag, forklifts, generators, transport, refrigeration, reefer trucks. So there you're talking U.S., Canada, Europe, Great Britain, South America. And then on top of this, you've facilitated over 20 best practice dealer groups. So I imagine like these peer groups. And then 10 years with a John Deere ag dealer out in Virginia. 5 years now doing consulting with Wise Wolf. George, you've got a fair amount to talk about.
Yeah, when you get to be this old, you got a lot to talk about.
That's fantastic because people often ask me, who are your favorite podcast guests? And I honestly can say it's always the next one, just because the amount of information that I learn. What got you started? I mean, with the DMS system, like how did you actually get into this industry?
I'd been working in computer software, and one day I got a phone call from somebody for a new position, and I went in for a 7-hour interview.
Wow.
And they said, we'll call you back. But that started 10 years with computer software for equipment dealers, and everything kind of flowed from there.
Wow. Well, I can say from working here at Tractor Zoom that data and information does tend to be the bedrock. And once you kind of understand that, then a lot of understanding of the whole industry really spawns from that. But talking about that, and kind of giving everybody a preview of what our conversation today is going to be about. When George and I were going back and forth about potential topics for today, I mean, we're covering everything from sales, inventory management, change management, absorption rates, rental, as well as we always get some good philosophical life lessons. So we're covering a gambit here. But considering all of the industry experience you have, and knowing that right now we're in early 2025, the economy, the ag economy especially, is a little slower. Let's start out with the juicy stuff, and let's get into sales. Especially here lately at Tractor Zoom, we spend a lot of time thinking about what makes a dealership sales team just really effective. How can they best utilize their resources? When you look at a lot of teams, how do they spend their times, whether it's customer calls or their focus on accounts? Like, what is the best use of their time?
My traditional approach has been account assignment, but I think you need to back up a little bit on that question.
Okay.
And that is, what's the sales manager's strategy for handling the business? Are they looking to penetrate the existing market? Are they just looking to hold on to what they have? That has a lot to do with where I think the balance is in how they assign accounts to salespeople. So are they doing 75% customers, 25% prospects? Or are they doing 75% prospects and 25% customers? What are they trying to do with this? Once you know what the sales manager is doing, then we go to the question of what's the salesman going to do? Salesperson. Okay, but I've got a sales manager years ago that told me he was hired right out of college, and he was given X number of counties, and he went out and just did a bang-up job. Next year, they cut his territory in half. Being a young kid, he said, I'm not going to let them, keep me down. I'm going to show them.
Mm-hmm.
So the second year, with half the territory, he did the same business. Third year, they cut his territory in half. He went out and did the same business again.
Wow.
Well, what did that tell you about the sales manager and their perspective, their information about what was in those counties? Sales manager didn't know the business. So what's the sales manager information, and do they know the accounts that are out there? Prior to us using CRMs, customer relationship management software, did the salespeople know all the accounts that were there? Did the sales manager know all the accounts that were there? Probably not.
Well, I was going to say on that topic, and maybe you're getting to this. So knowing everything that's out there and then splitting it up appropriately. I mean, you had mentioned like the 25-75 split. So 75, if you're working 75% prospects, you're growing the business. But
Right.
even knowing, how do you know what's out there? And then how do you go about that account segmentation? Breaking, farmers or potential customers into high priority, low priority. How do you do that?
Well, certainly we expect the salespeople to bring information back, but we need that information in a place the sales manager can look at it, organize it, decide what to do with it. Do you want the salesperson calling on every one of those accounts? Now, if that prospect has one small 25 horsepower tractor to take care of their garden, is that someplace that the salesperson should be going weekly? Or should they be spending their time at a farm that has 14 tractors and a whole lot of implements? Okay, where do the salespeople put their time? As we've looked at the business over the years, and this particular discussion applies to almost any industry, but it's appropriate here also. My experience has been 40% of the potential revenue out there is maybe done by 1 to 2% of your accounts. You've got large producers in your area that bring you or your competition a lot of business. Then you've got maybe the next 30% of business might be 10 to 12, 15% of your accounts. Well, notice here, at best, we've got 20% of the accounts and they've done 70% of your business. As a sales manager, are you assigning those accounts to salespeople? But in talking about those top accounts, I'm not saying customers, I'm saying accounts.
Mm-hmm.
Because prospects are accounts and they can be just as big as your current customers. Are your salespeople calling on the big prospects at the same frequency that they're calling on the big customers? Or are they spending their time on the 65% of the customers and prospects that bring you 10% of your business?
Hey everybody, quick break from the show and then we're going to get you right back to the conversation. But I wanted to take a moment to let you know how TractorZoom is partnering with all of our dealership partners to fuel their dealership growth. We're doing that with TractorZoom Pro to give people better valuations, faster access to it, and the ability to manage their inventory using AI, using large data. Even if their dealership doesn't have the capacity to develop the AI and the large data themselves, it's all there within TractorZoom Pro. And also with Anvil Pro, integrated business systems solution. You can actually cut costs by integrating solutions, not paying for all these extra one-offs, and keep people in the same solution so you're not constantly switching screens. And then you could optimize your workflows, do a lot of things with automation that technology should be able to do right now. So just two ways that TractorZoom is working with our dealer partners to really help them fuel their dealership growth. Okay, you can check out some links in the show notes. You can also go to TractorZoomPro.com to check all that stuff out. But we'd love to at least show you all the different ways that we're helping our dealership partners. Okay, let's get back to the show. Hope you're enjoying it. How do you go then about, let's say if you're not sized, kind of like you had just suggested with that stratified prioritization. If you're not broken down like that, how do you think about assessing accounts in dealership? Do you just straight geography? Do you go off of previous past relationships? How do you get to that point if you're not there?
Generally, I think we need to have a balance because I want the accounts to be geographically clustered for good use of a salesperson's time. I don't want them driving 75 miles for a single account when everybody else is close around them. Okay, so how do you cluster the accounts, but then how do you look at getting the best coverage for the high volume accounts and not having a salesperson spend too much time or maybe even equal time on low volume accounts? If a salesperson has potential for illustration, let's say 5 calls a day, he's going to do he or she is going to do 5 calls a day, 5 days a week. So I've got 25 calls. I'll even be generous and say maybe only 20 calls. But they do this 50 weeks a year because they got 2 weeks of vacation. So I've got 1,000 calls potential for the year from that single salesperson. Now, how frequently do I want that salesperson calling on the big accounts? And how frequently do I want them calling on the one piece of equipment accounts, what I call the D accounts? Well, I probably want them monthly, at least, on my large accounts. Maybe bi-monthly on my second level of accounts, B accounts. And my C accounts maybe quarterly. Well, I would expect the same thing in allocating the call frequency as the number of calls. So if If 40% of my business is those large A accounts, then I want 40% of my calls on the A accounts. If I do those guys monthly, I could get about 33 accounts in 400 calls with monthly calls.
Mhm.
I've done the math. Likewise, if I did 30% of my calls, or 300, on my B accounts, and I'm going to see them every other month, I can get about 50 B accounts for that salesperson. Now I'm going to do quarterly calls for the C accounts, and I've only got 200 calls for those. So again, I've got about 50 accounts. And I might have 100 calls left after that allocation. And I probably use those for emergencies. Somebody calls in, somebody emails, somebody goes to the website that we didn't have on our list, and I need to take care of it. But if I add that together, I've got 133 accounts that salesperson can cover. Now, if I look at 3 counties,
Mm-hmm.
and we know how many accounts we have, do we have more than 133 accounts? Because if we do, what's going to happen is we're either going to be weak in one of those 3 categories, or we're going to ignore a whole bunch of accounts that are in those counties because we didn't have enough salespeople to cover them.
Mm-hmm.
So when you start to look at it, not by how many counties do I have and how is a salesperson going to cover it, but you look at how many calls the salesperson can do, all of a sudden, 3 counties might be too much. 4
So
counties might be fine.
Mhm.
How many acres does each farmer have, and how many farms are there within the county? Now I start looking at, can I get good coverage from a salesperson with these parameters? And am I going to cover that county correctly, or that group of accounts correctly? I might need 2 salespeople for 3 counties.
Mhm.
In other places, based on large farms, I might need 1. But in the past, we've looked at geography because we didn't stop and do the math to determine what sort of coverage we wanted.
Yeah. And so it sounds like, I mean, to run that kind of organization, you need, first of all, to keep track of what everybody's doing, and then also give them a process. So I imagine that's where CRM
Yeah.
would really add value. But then you're also laying out the strategy of here strategically is what you're after, and then you're working back to figure out tactically how many salespeople, what kind of coverage you need.
Right. And I don't think many salespeople have done that. And frequently the sales managers are responding more to the manufacturer's insistence on account coverage because they want market share. But they're not measuring it based on salesman's time. They're not measuring it based on geography. The manufacturer just wants share. And to them, what that really means is that's keeping their production line busy. That's why the manufacturers care about share. It has nothing to do with the dealer's profitability or the salesman's effort.
Right. And so we often find that there's a lot of, there's a bit, a push and a pull there to make both parties happy.
Yeah.
And so that conversation and that strategic setup was a lot about sales effort and outbound sales effort. But what about inbound? And so inbound leads are fantastic, right? Somebody's warm, they want to buy from you already, but it's not always clean cut. So what would you say when you have either an email, a text, a call in coming in through the central hub? Uh, what's your take on commission fairness? But I mean, who answered the phone? Whose county it was in? Who had the existing relationship that may have already brought that person in? How do you manage that mess?
My first question is, what's the sales manager's strategy, and how do they want to handle it? I've seen some sales managers that would pass that unsolicited phone call off to an in-house salesperson to handle it initially. And then once they've quantified that account, then they may choose to hand it off to a local salesperson, or they may just handle that sale in-house till they know more. Other people are going to directly pass it off to a salesperson based on geography. To me, the question still comes back down to dealership strategy. What do they want to do? It's not going to be one solution handles the situation for everybody.
But yeah, having that clear, defined strategy articulated down into a process ahead of time,
Yes.
often avoids a lot of those issues. Now, we had just talked about the importance of the CRM system and just the processes and the management of executing the strategy, which at the core basic gets down to data. How is it structured? How is it organized? And I mean, you had plenty of years at a DMS company, and then every other position after that, I'm sure you dealt with data and data utilization. So how do you put that dealer dataship to work? And maybe a more pointed question is, what common data sets within dealerships do you think are overlooked, underutilized, or potential gold mines?
Well, I think as the current economy is so questionable what's going on, I think we need to look at some of the data for salespeople and consider what's the purchasing cycle for an account. Do we have a farmer that buys every 7 years or every 10 years? Now, it may be different cycles for tractors than it is for implements. Okay, but what's the purchase cycle for an account? And to do that, you got to go back in history. You got to look at your data. So you've got a dealership that's in the third generation. They've been on a computer software system for the last 50 years. So let's go back to we're only 25 years into the 21st century. Mm-hmm. We go back to 75, and there were some computer software.
Yeah.
But 40 or 50 years. But let's look back at all the invoices of what we've sold to that account during that last 40 or 50 years. How many tractors did we sell? What size? What model? Etc. What implements have we sold? What's the replacement cycle for those accounts? So I want to use the historic data of the account to prompt the salesperson on when they need to plan the next tractor or implement sale. Likewise, based on the history, does the customer buy new or do they buy used? And what equipment do we currently have, especially with this tariff culture that we're dealing with right now? If the customer has bought new in the past, but we have late model, well-maintained equipment on the lot outside, should that be something that we're pushing to the customer because tariff is not going to impact used equipment predominantly? If anything, it's going to drive the price up.
Right.
Okay. But the customer doesn't have a tariff charge on used equipment. So is that the type of value that that customer would like to pay? And now, it's not going to be the same answer for every customer, but, is that something else to think of? So we get to look at the turnover cycle for our customers. Is there any way to look at turnover cycle for prospects? Could be.
How would you
could
do
be
that?
Quotations. If we have quotations that long ago, if we've been calling on that account and keeping records, we might have, quoted equipment that didn't sell. But that's the reason we have CRMs.
Which gets to the importance of data governance and collecting good data. And
Yes.
not just being, transactional with the data and just using it for the here and now and then shoving
Right.
it in a closet.
Right.
Okay. How would you use that call data, getting to maybe tariffs or a changing environment? How would you use any of that historical call data plus whatever else is externally streaming in to adjust call frequency? Or would you?
I'm probably going to make a comment here that's not going to be comfortable to everyone. But as I said, my normal approach is to put more calls in the large accounts, less calls in the small accounts. So one question would be, how many pieces of equipment does an account have? Now, you probably need to balance that between tractors and implements.
Mhm.
But, how many acres do they have? How many tractors do they have? How many implements do they have? Where are you going to put your effort? Because one guy has the potential to buy one tractor a year. Somebody else has the potential to buy 12 tractors a year. Well, I definitely want to go with the amount of calls and the effort into that large account. So I want to look at there's a strong relationship between the revenue volume and potential, the number of pieces of equipment, and generally the number of acres.
Okay, so I've got a specific question on that because this conversation actually just came up with a colleague of mine here at TractorZoom and then a dealer that we're working with. How many dealerships do you think have great data on their customers in terms of the customer's fleet and the number of acres?
I think the number is small. I don't have any specific information on it, but I think, unfortunately, the amount of dealers that have good information is limited.
Yeah. Yep. But doesn't make that data any less valuable. In fact, it probably makes it more valuable because it's a rare commodity.
Yeah.
So, George, my next question is one that I don't know if it makes me a complete hypocrite or it stabs me a little. that I love spreadsheets, but I also understand that there's problems with them. And so how, now that we're talking about collecting this data and using it and making decisions off of it, how should dealers balance that potential love of spreadsheets with more of a systematic process or a platform?
My experience with dealerships in a variety of industries is pretty much the same of what I saw when I worked in an ag dealership. And that is, salespeople have been allowed to do their own thing for so many years that converting them to a CRM takes time, challenge, and commitment. If the dealer principal is committed to doing it, and the sales manager is committed to doing it, you've got to start showing salespeople that you're using the information in the CRM. Otherwise, they're going to do their own spreadsheet, they're going to use their daytimer, they're going to use Outlook, whatever they've done in the past, and each of them does their own thing. Mm-hmm. But the dealership is paying salespeople to go out and talk with accounts to gather data so that we can do a better job of selling. The more information we get into the CRM, the better our information and analytics can be. But in order to encourage and convince salespeople to do it, sales management, ownership, and anything else in the company has got to show salespeople that doing the work in the CRM has value. Mm-hmm. And that means I want to see a weekly meeting with what we did in our dealership. We had a weekly Tuesday morning sales call, and we had 6 branches. We had 18, 20 salespeople. Everyone called in on the telephone. This is pre-COVID. Mm-hmm. We didn't have video calls yet. Yeah. But everyone called in on the telephone, and sales manager went through what was in the CRM, what the open quotes were, what the contact activity was with salespeople. But the whole point was to show salespeople that what they're putting into the CRM has value, and we're utilizing it. If you don't demonstrate that to salespeople regularly, they're not going to put the effort into putting it into the CRM. Once you get a salesperson converted to doing that, all of a sudden they start to realize the opportunity and the information they have, and they start going back and saying, can I get a list of all the service work that's been done on this account? Because that'll start to tell them some things. But you've got to get them converted from, my dad used something called Daytimer, and he used it religiously. He'd put, appointments for next week. He'd put appointments for, the end of the year in his Daytimer, and he'd keep track of it. Well, a CRM's just the same thing. We're just doing it electronically. Mm-hmm. He didn't have that back 1950.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us in this episode of Beyond the Hood with Tractor Zoom. In my conversations today with George, we talked a lot about sales leadership, sales management, and efficiency. If you're not yet aware of how Tractor Zoom is helping equipment dealerships across the United States, go to TractorZoomPro.com and you can learn a lot more there. Now, this is also part of a much larger conversation I had with George. In the next episode, we'll be talking about optimizing inventory management and ensuring effective data utilization. I hope to see you there.